Good afternoon. Hope you guys are doing well. All right, so when it comes to learning acrylic nails, what I believe is one of the most important things is going to be being able to pick the product up and set it down with the right consistency. So what I have here is some cover Flamingo. So for those of you guys that have it, this color is absolutely amazing. What you want to do, it depends on obviously the size of the brush you're working with, but I'm working with the Signature Series, which is a number 12. If you submerge your brush, right, and you do this, right, take it, lightly tap it, and again, take the brush, submerge it, lightly tap it, and pull down and bounce inside the powder, what you're going to manage to get is something that is going to release from your brush very easily. Okay, so a lot of problems that beginners run into is that they take their brush and they bounce on the sides or swivel it, and then what they do is they just try to hold it in the surface like this. I want to show you, if you just hold it in the surface, do you notice how dry all those edges are around? That's a big problem, right? And again, like you can see, if I'm pressing onto the nail, it's very difficult for this to come off, right? So if you take your brush and submerge it all the way, and you can see how deep the dish is, right? So if I took my brush and go all the way down to the bottom and I put my finger right here, that is the depth of the dish. So I usually submerge it just past the hair, right? That's enough so that if I rest my brush inside, all I will have to do again is just lightly tap on that empty space. Now again, like if I took my brush and lightly tap, I don't want to do this. Again, another problem is taking, say, the right amount of liquid, and let's say you just hold your brush into the surface and you continue to hold it thinking you're going to get something, and then you go to pick it up and then it sits right back inside the powder. That's a big problem as well, because for those of you guys that are learning how to do nails, what you usually will try to do is try to get it, and then you end up with this asteroid on the end of the brush, which again is not going to sit well while you're working. So the key, again, is to submerge your brush, lightly tap, and then you physically have to pull down at an angle, right? So if I pull down at an angle and then I start to bounce, you're going to see that I'm able to load something that absorbs really, really well. Now, once you're able to pick something up, I want to show you, right? So if you submerge your brush, you're able to pull down and bounce inside the powder, again, you can see, submerge my brush, lightly pull back, 1, 2, 3. Notice that the size of beads, submerge my brush, tap, pull, 1, 2, 3. They're all going to be consistent in size. Submerge, tap, pull down, 1, 2, 3. Again, what I'm able to do is pick up beads that are going to be consistent, right? So if I'm working, say, an overlay, right, what we want to be able to do is set the product down, right, starting at the cuticle area so that the back end, right, is going to taper, right, taper down to the back, not just this area here, but you want it to taper towards the side walls as well, right? So if I have the right consistency, then what you're going to be able to do is you're going to be able to get a bead, and again, this powder, right, by bouncing into the surface, waiting a couple of seconds, and then lightly setting it down with just a little bit of space is going to give me the ability to lightly push behind the cuticle, getting it tight, right? I don't have to force it. Now, notice the bead is going to start running towards the side. So if I was just to hold the sides, like this, as the bead ran all the way down to the free edge, I'm actually able to control the movement of the product in the least amount of effort. Take a look at this. If I just took the tip of my brush and lightly feather this without really doing anything, all I would have to do again is kind of hold this into place, control the flow so that everything runs again, and you can see, right? You see how it tapers down to the back end, kind of gets flat right here. So at this point, if I was to use the body of the brush and actually like maybe feather the sides to tighten it up, right, and start to put a little bit of arch into the surface, what we're going to naturally create is a structure that again is not going to be too thick at the cuticle areas. It's going to be nice and tight around the perimeter of the nail. You can even see as I'm brushing through the surface, right, and actually straightening this up, you can even see from this side right here where everything again tapers this way as well as towards the back end. Okay, so this is something that you want to try to master without forcing the product, right, from this point to this point. A lot of beginners make the mistake of taking the brush, working with the finger way too flat instead of at an angle. If you're working with the finger way too flat, let's say you're successful at actually picking this up, but you do this. You actually push it to the back, right? And you keep the finger too flat. Look what ends up happening. Everything ends up running down towards the side walls. And then, again, you're trying to pick it up, right? And then you're trying to brush it forward. And then you end up getting it, like a lot of people will end up trying to brush it off of the nail, right? And then it ends up either smearing down the side, right? Or getting your brush jammed up with way too much acrylic. What we want to be able to do, right, is we want to be able to control the self-leveling nature of the acrylic, right? And what it needs is it pretty much needs to breathe. It needs oxygen. And you're going to notice as well, I don't keep the finger flat while I work. I keep it at an angle like this. And the reason why I keep it at an angle like this is so that when I set my brush down, right, it's going to create that beautiful tapering effect from the cuticle area through the upper arch all the way to the end of the nail. We don't want it just right here. What we want is basically all around the perimeter of the nail. Okay, so again, we want to try to keep the finger pointed down towards the towel. Normally what I like to do when I'm doing an overlay or I'm trying to judge, especially this length, and we can assume, right, this is a tip that's actually glued onto the surface of the nail. If I was to submerge my brush, right, lightly tap, again, loading, and notice when I tap the brush, I'm tapping this side. I'll give you guys a close-up. Submerge my brush, see where I tap? It's almost dead center. Boom, right there. I'm not doing this. I'm not pulling it. I would pull it if I wanted to go with a really, really small bead. If I took my brush and I pulled the hair all the way to the tip, you're going to notice now when I actually set it inside and bounce, I'm pretty much going to get something that's probably perfect for a fill, right? If I need something large that's going to flow from this point to this point, I need to get something a little bit bigger than half the size of the nail. And again, I have to keep the finger pointed at this angle. I don't want it like this. If I set it down and push it this way, everything is going to run this way. If I set it down with a little bit of space, and what I mean by a little bit of the space, if the tip of the brush acts as a barrier between the cuticle area, and see a little bit of plastic that I didn't cut off, if this actually sits here and it allows me, right, that very, very tip, I'll show you guys. Like you see, I'm just poking the tip right behind. You're using about that much of the tip as the barrier to the cuticle area. So watch. If I submerge my brush, I get a nice amount of liquid. I pull down, I bounce, bounce, bounce. I wait. 1, 2, 3. Take a look. If I have a little bit of space, watch. That little tip that I showed you, if I'm able to literally walk behind the cuticle, even if the product starts to slide, I can take the side of the brush and just bring it back up. Right? For those of you guys that are practicing, a great way to practice is by actually trying to set it down as tight as you can to the cuticle area without brushing it forward. At this point right here, For those of you who can get the product to kind of run, right, all the way down to a little bit past halfway, notice if I took the tip of my brush and I just lightly started to pull the very, very front end of the acrylic, forget the back, just right here at the very, very front, right? Look at this. Lightly start pulling through, lightly start pulling through. Everything is going to seal and create. You see that beautiful arch that you're actually able to create, right? The key to building any kind of structure, even on length, like you'll even notice this. Like if I looked at this and I noticed that the acrylic was a little bit past, what I could do is I could use the wedge of the brush just to lightly kind of push it up and even. See this? Up and even, and then brush through the nail. So kind of pressing it in and then pulling through. You can see how everything tapers down to the back end, right? Not just this area, but the side walls as well. We're trying to create as natural of a shape as we possibly can. So again, reviewing some of the content, right? If I was to take my brush again and lightly tap it, right? I don't want to do this. I don't want to water ski across the surface, because then what it ends up doing is creating this really, really flat bead, right? Let's say you didn't have enough liquid. So you took your brush and you pulled most of the liquid out and you water skied across the surface. This is what ends up happening. You end up getting this really dry booger on the end of your brush, right? A lot of liquid on the front, really dry on the ends, really dry here. If I was to take my brush and just lightly tap it, I want to use about that much of my brush right there, that much of my brush. And again, I'm coming down at almost, I would say, a 30 to 40 degree angle. Even if you came at a 45 degree angle and pushed down, think of it that way, right? 45 degree angle, kind of bounce inside the powder, right? Take a look at how nice and even and fluffy that is. You're not doing this. You're not going like this. You don't want to do this, because then you're going to end up harpooning, right, the acrylic and creating this mushroom cloud on the very, very end. You don't want to, right? You don't want to get most of the liquid off of your brush and just kind of set it in the surface. You don't want to just set it. If you just set it like this, praying that the product is going to pick up, what's going to end up happening is you're going to end up getting way too dry of a product. You can even see if I touch, I'm trying to touch the surface. It's sticking in my brush. It's not even releasing from the end of my brush. You need enough liquid so that the liquid kind of grabs the natural nail. So if I submerge my brush, again, with the amount of liquid I have, and I end up barely touching it, again, right dead center from that brush, barely touching, you're going to notice that if I pull down and bounce, watch, oops, sorry about that. That is, let me get that out. Sometimes that does happen. Come back. I just want to be able to show you. If I take my brush, submerge my brush again, and I bounce, right? I get a nice, if I have enough liquid and I barely touch, do you see how it releases? You want it to be able to grab the surface of the natural nail. So again, for those of you guys that are practicing, you have a lot of liquid on your brush. If you have way too much liquid, if you set it down into the surface and you're hoping that it's going to pick it up, chances are it's going to fall right back in. If you get the same amount of liquid, same difference, right? If you pull down and you actually bounce inside the powder, it absorbs quick. So even with light pressure, look at that, light pressure comes right off. And that's what you want to be able to do so that you can take the tip of the brush. Now let's go ahead and get some tips. We'll kind of cover this again. For those of you guys that jumped in late, right? You want to be able to set, right, the product to the back end so that it creates this natural taper. You'll notice from the side profile, with the tip of my brush, look at that, right? As flat as that is, if I was to set the bead down about right there and then just with about that much of my brush, kind of poke at the back end while the acrylic is moving in this direction, you're going to create a natural shape, a natural flow that's going to be really, really thick. One of the things we work on, we have a group of of students at OWC, which is our 1-week course right now, and everyone's training with gel. The best part about gel is when you're laying gel to the natural nail, it's going to self-level. You already have a perfect consistency. For those people that are learning acrylic, right, it's being able to set it down to the surface with enough space around the back end so that you could use about that much of the brush to basically touch from this point to this point while the bead moves down. So if I was to take my brush, let me just go ahead and secure this so that it doesn't fall off. There we go. Okay. If I was to take my brush, I'm submersing it on the back end. I'm getting a nice amount, again, of liquid. I'm going to pull down, bounce, 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 bounce. Give it a few seconds. 1, 2, 3, set it down. And again, I'm going to show you something. Take a look at the space. Take a look at the space. I want you guys to see this. Take a look at the space. Okay, now that's important. If you can set it with that kind of space, you kind of see how it teardrops down. I'm not going to do anything. All I'm going to do is just hold it in place, okay? All right, so for those of you who are successful at actually getting it down, I'm using a Greg Signature Series brush, which is a number 12, right? So if you're able to set it down with that kind of space, what you're going to be able to do is you're going to be able to use, again, that much of your brush to lightly touch behind the cuticle area. For those of you that think that you have to get it right up to the cuticle area, it's going to be very, very difficult if you're pushing it right against the skin. So if you, again, submerge your brush, you get quite a bit of liquid, and again, lightly touching the center of the dish, you're going to pull down at about a 45-degree angle. Pull down, bounce, bounce, bounce. Get yourself a nice, healthy bead on one side of your brush. Count to about 4. Give yourself some space. Release. Look at this. The very tip of the brush. Like I'm kind of lightly sliding it right to the very, very end. So now you're going to notice, look at this. Like I can literally get it as close to the edge. And if I was doing a smile line, what I would be able to do is lightly kind of bring this down, and you can see how the smile line is created. I'd be able to work in reverse application, use the tip of the brush, lightly touch this back, get the smile line absolutely perfect. Every time you wipe your brush, it's almost like you're removing a little bit of monomer, kind of drying this out, allowing the product to set, right? So if I wanted to come in and actually build out some shape, this would be great if I was doing a really, really deep smile line. Boom, as you can see, right? And what you would be able to do is take the form, press it up to the edge, and recreate, right? You can see from this point, I'll just mark it. If I was going to take this and I was actually going to mark from this point to this point right here, you're noticing that I have the least amount of ledge around the perimeter of the nail. If I have the least amount of ledge around the perimeter of the nail, this is going to be very easy for me to file into shape. The biggest problem that a lot of beginners run into when they're doing acrylic is they'll do this. They'll start from the tip, right? Let's say that you're a beginner, right? And you're like, I don't like the way the product runs. You're able to pick it up, but what you do is you do this. You drain it, and then you set it here. You go like this, and then what you've done is you've set a big block onto the nail. So you end up pushing it like this. You end up pushing it forward, right? Trying to get it even. And what you notice is that you're creating this mass amount right here, right? So okay, you're successful at actually applying a bead to the very, very front. Some of you guys will actually push too hard, and what will end up happening is the product will slide underneath the free edge just like that, okay? So if you end up doing this first, what ends up happening is if you're able to get something, at this point, what you're gonna do is you're gonna go like this, and then you're gonna end up brushing it forward. What I just did was I just basically thickened up this whole entire area and made this like it's like a block of acrylic that's going to be really difficult to file into shape, right? People who start from the front end up making way more mistakes than starting at the cuticle area. The key is understanding how to apply the product from the back and moving from this point to this point by allowing the product to level on its own. Okay, now I'm using Rosebud. Let's say we were going to work with a core pink, right? So you can see I have a drawer full of stuff. This is a regular setting product. The cover Flamingo sets quite fast. But let's say we were just going to work with core pink. This is like a much lighter, transparent pink. It actually has more workability. It sets slower. How am I going to control? How am I going to get the same control working with a slower setting product? Like, it's the same. The only difference is that, when you pick the product up and you're successfully able to pick something up on one side of the brush, it's a matter of allowing it to breathe. Again, giving oxygen time to set in. If you were to take the product, pick this up, and just set this down like this, I want to show you what ends up happening, right? Look at this. Look how fast everything starts to move. Look how fast that's moving. I mean, it's almost like water. And I feel that once it's to this point, everyone starts to panic because everything is running down the edges. And even if I was to brush it now, take a look at that. It ends up sticking all over the place. So how do you control something that is a slower setting product? Well, again, we need to give it time to set. And again, it's not much time. It's only a few seconds. So to get the same workability as though you were working with this product, what I have to do is I have to submerge my brush. Again, I need to lightly tap to load one side of the brush at a 45-degree angle. I want to pull down, bounce, bounce, bounce. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. At a 5 count, I release. Now, I could use the very, very tip of my brush to walk around the edge. And again, I'm keeping contact, but notice that if I just literally just touch the sides, even though the product might be running a little bit faster on this right side, it's fully controllable. I could take the tip and I could lightly kind of feather it over the front end and allow it to continue to self-level. This is going to give you the ability, again, with the right balance, I'm keeping connection to my hand. I'm going to be able to walk back over the top. I'm going to be able to walk back over the top and control the flow of the product without it getting away from me. This is really, really important, right? So for those of you, again, that you say it might be too cold, like I noticed during the winter time, everything is running, it's getting out of the way. The reason why we cover overlays, and I feel this is really the most important aspect of actually learning how to do acrylic nails, because a lot of you guys out there who are not used to sculpting, not building on a form, and for those of you guys that are not building on a nail form, for those of you guys that are building on a nail tip, you have to remember that if I was to take, right, again, these practice fingers are a lot longer, but let's just say that you're working on a nail, right, and it's literally only that big. So let's say you just learned how to glue tips on, right? You glue the tip on, you mount the tip, you end up filing the tip, you blend the tip, and then you have this length. Everybody out there does overlays. And you'll notice most of the shops that you go out there and get your nails done, right? Really, really skilled and really, I would say, proficient nail technicians. They're always starting from back here. This is the key. You have to be able to learn to embrace the run, right? Self-leveling is the fancy way of saying it runs, right? And so what we want to be able to do is, for me, it's about giving you guys the right, basically, fundamentals. So for those of you that are actually interested because you just have this you have this absolute passion for doing nails, I want to be able to show you guys how you can be successful so that if you're practicing, you're going to practice successful. For those of you guys that are pros, We want to be able to give you guys an understanding so that you're able to basically increase speed, work faster, right? Everything is about balance. You notice when I'm working, it doesn't matter whether I'm working with my brush, it doesn't matter if I'm working, right, with a bottle. It's always like if I'm applying top coat, right, I have balance, right? It does, and you can see I'm actually holding the bottle in my hand so that when I'm actually applying the brush, I have contact with my finger, right? Majority of the success of the work that you do as a nail technician is always based on balance. Even my electric file, if I was to take the handpiece of my e-file, if I was to fire this up, notice, right, again, that I have balance, right? I have connection right here. You can see that the electric file is resting in my hand. That way, when I'm working around the surface, I'm not doing this. If you were to hold the electric file like this and do this, this is what's going to end up happening. It's going to end up spinning around the edge. If you had basically contact, you had control, like you're riding, what you're able to do is work around the surface, right, and reduce the thickness that you need without the bit slipping, losing control, right? It's all about balance. And if you guys master it, everything you do, acrylic, gel, polishing, gel polish, everything is going to be 10 times easier. All right, really wanted to get out here today, share that with you. For those of you guys, again, that struggle with application, you could always hit us up on all platforms. If you guys are new to TikTok, join us. We're live 2 to 3 days a week for nail school. And then for those of you guys that are following us on Twitch, we do that 3 days a week. For those of you guys that don't know anything about it, join us. We have an amazing talk show, Tracy and Habib, myself, Karen, Melissa, the whole crew. It's all about giving you guys as much information as we can to get you to the next level. Appreciate your time. We'll see you at the next episode of Nail School. Have a wonderful day. Peace.
Subscribe channel now. Subscribe channel now. Sub and subscribe and